Well, thank you for joining us for another installment of Wednesdays in the Word, and we're going to continue that next step in this series, Faith Essentials for the Journey. And just like many of us for this summer, we're preparing for vacation and time away, just some relaxation. We take some essentials for that journey to make sure it's a great trip. And I'm simply arguing in this series that we also must do the same when it comes to our faith walk with the Lord. There's certain essentials that we must have with us if we're going to experience this life of faith and this walk with our Lord. And so, to quote Watchman Nee again, I want to make sure we understand what the Christian experience is all about. The Christian experience from start to finish is a journey of faith. And that's really what we've been landing on. And this principle today, I think, is equally important, and it actually ties to the previous video in which we looked at seeing ourselves clearly. And so we want to take that a step further as to how that works. And so in this video, we want to raise the question, are we seeing others clearly? Thank you for joining us, and I want to kick this off because, as I said in the intro, it really is connected to the previous video, but this really brings some handles to it. This really determines whether or not this really works out for us. And so if I had to kick this off, I would kick it off with a few weeks ago, Major League Baseball did a tremendous, I thought, act of celebration, celebrating Juneteenth with a professional baseball game in Birmingham at the historic Rickwood Park, where the Birmingham Black Barons of the old Negro League used to play baseball. And those of you who follow the sport know that those statistics from the old Negro League have now been layered in and rolled in with all statistics with all Major League Baseball. And so those stars, those great players are now being recognized universally as they should. And I guess what caught my attention is a man by the name of Bill Greasom. Bill Greasom actually played in the old Negro League. He was the first black pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals. He fought at Iwo Jima and served his country. Pastored there in Birmingham for about 53 plus years. He's 99 years old, the oldest living Negro baseball player, Negro League baseball player, and he threw out the first pitch. And so he was interviewed afterwards, and here's what he said, and I just think it's so important. He said, "I was taught at a young age to know who you are and don't worry about other people and see if you can help them. But just remember who you are and try to do the best you could." In a word, Greasom was saying, look, in spite of the negative conditions in which he was raised during a time of Jim Crow, deep segregation, deep racism. You can't allow the environment, you can't allow the social and societal pressures to define you. You have to know who you are. And when you know who you are, you know how to see others clearly. And that really is the biblical mandate of what it means to see others clearly. Before we can see others clearly, we have to see ourselves clearly. That is very critical. And that's why I said this video, in a sense, relates to the previous video about seeing ourselves clearly, and this takes it more practically. The test of whether we know that we really see ourselves clearly is how we treat others. If we treat others negatively or in a very destructive manner, it's an indication, at least from a Christian worldview, that we don't see ourselves clearly. But if we treat them in the way the Lord treats us, we treat people with grace, with compassion, with accountability, with truth, but measured with mercy, then we are seeing ourselves clearly. It's kind of like the question you may ask, how do you know whether a person has really received the grace of God? You know, Christians can call on God and say they receive grace, but how do you know they've really ingested grace? Well, the test will be do they respond with behavior that is gracious? In other words, when God gives them grace, do they turn around and give that grace, not only in their personal walk with God, but grace to others and grace to other individuals, even those that may disagree with them? That is the biblical vision of how you know a person receives grace. If they have received this grace of God, and yet they turn around and treat people negatively and spitefully and treat them in a very, very harsh manner, then it's quite possible they have not received the grace of God. And so the test of whether grace has happened in a person's life is whether or not grace is translated in their lives. And that's exactly the biblical vision of what it means to see others clearly. The question is, we know we've seen others clearly when we first have seen ourselves clearly. And when we've seen ourselves clearly, we're going to treat others in the same way we would want to be treated. There are two scriptures that kind of push on this. The first one is Psalm 8, verses 3-6. It says, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon, the stars which you have ordained, I say, what is man that you take thought of him, and the son of man that you care for him?" And these are two phrases that the psalmist used to describe himself as just a regular human being. "Yet you have made him a little lower than God. You have crowned him with glory and majesty. You make him to rule over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet." And here, this was an enthronement psalm that many times was read at the coronation ceremony of a king in Israel. And the point is, when you see yourself clearly, you're going to treat the people under your responsibility with the same dignity, the same value that God sees you. That's exactly what is going on in Psalm 3. Jesus will take up that same enthronement psalm in the New Testament as he is the King of Kings that comes with the kingdom. And then, of course, the most popular scripture, the Great Commandment, not the Great Commission, which is the sending of all disciples into the world, but the Great Commandment, Matthew 22:37-40, where Jesus says, "You shall love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind, and soul." And then the second commandment, he says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." What's the test of whether or not I love myself? Do I love my neighbor? Do I treat them with dignity? Do I treat them with value? Do I treat them with compassion? Do I treat them with grace in the same way that God treats me? If God treats me with grace, compassion, and dignity and blessing, and yet I turn around and mistreat my neighbor, it's quite possible that I don't see them clearly. And so that's the point that we want to raise today. And so what I want to do, I want to look at 5 ways culture defines who we are. And then I want to give you a principle that resonates with what we just said, just a simple principle that summarizes that. And then those values that we want to convey to others that ought to be inherent in ourselves. So number 1, culture loves to define itself as autonomous individual. There's a strong hyper-individualism today in our culture. In other words, we really can make it through life without God. We can figure things out on our own. There was a time we needed God, but now we've come to a place, particularly with technology and with intellect and rationality, we can figure everything out without God. There's a sense that even this pushes in Christian circles, that, hey, as long as God blesses me, I can handle the rest. But I really don't need God to intrude on other areas in my life. I just need him to kind of work this one area. I got the rest down. And really, it just really pushes this idea that I don't need God. And so we got to be aware of this individualism, this hyper-individualism. And surely individualism doesn't all have to be completely bad. I truly believe God disciples us and teaches us in a way that we can stand on our own 2 feet, but never at the expense that somehow we don't need God. And so number 1 is this hyper-individualism, or what we would call this autonomous individual. Number 2 is the idea of evolution. That is, we actually evolved from a lower form. And what we see today is our highest possibility, and we can go higher. And surely I would be the first one to admit that at this stage of my life, I am not the same person that I was when I first came out of college, or even after I was married and had my first 2 children with my wife. I have truly evolved into a different person, hopefully a better person. But the problem with this principle, I think there are two things when we make evolution the basis for identity, human identity. Number one, it definitely, I think, infringes on esteem. If I think that I came from something of a lower form and I have something to look back on, how can I appreciate who I am right now? But then number two, where does that evolution end? Do I become God? And we surely see this in our culture, that there are individuals who actually aspire to be idols or little gods, if you will, with some kind of supernatural power without ever needing Almighty God. The scriptures never calls human beings God. Matter of fact, the scriptures indicate there are no other gods but Yahweh himself. And so that's the danger of defining ourselves with an evolutionary perspective. So number two would be evolution. Number three, tribalism. In other words, we're defined by what tribe we associate. And there's a sense that this one kind of pushes against number one. If individualism is something that we learn at the expense of a tribe or community, then tribalism is something that is valued or treasured at the expense of an individual. And so our whole sense of identity is connected to the particular tribe that I'm a part of. The problem is that what the tribe wants becomes more important than what's best for society. And so the idea is that, hey, if you're against my tribe, you're the enemy. If you don't agree with my tribe, you must be the enemy. There's no differences of opinion. There's no moderation in terms of where a person may land as it relates to those tribal values. It's either in or out, and you kind of get this either or mentality, and that's where you get the conflict and the division in our culture. And so number three, I would call it tribalism. We're defined by what tribe that we're connected to. The fourth one is definitely technology. And surely I'd be the first one to say that, hey, I am grateful to the advances and how technology enriches our lives. And surely there are plenty of examples, and I would say even the scriptures would indicate that God gave us creation to use for human benefit. And that would also include technology. Just as a farmer works the ground and he kind of reformulates the ground to produce certain crops to feed his family, so also technology says we can go and take the minerals and resources in the earth that we have available for us to create these technologies that can actually make human flourishing better. So there's an element there. I'm not completely decrying technology. The problem is when technology becomes our essence and our reason for existence. Our technology usage, they say it's up to 5, sometimes 6 hours a day, and that seems to be a very moderate survey as well. Many believe the numbers are much, much higher, especially amongst our teens. And what happens is we develop this impersonal space, and we're very impersonal when it comes to our relationships. Loneliness is on the super increase because of the rise of technology and social media, but then also too the mental health spaces. Many experts are contending that much of the mental health problems that we're seeing in our society, particularly amongst our young people, is because of the excess and the overemphasis of the technology, our devices, and social media. And so we got to be careful that we don't find our sense of self, our sense of being, based on what somebody posted on Instagram or in some kind of technological device or social media expression. And to add about technology, here Neil Postman has a great quote. He says, "A new technology sometimes creates more than it destroys. Sometimes it destroys more than it creates, but it is never one-sided." I think that's a fair way of looking at technology. Yeah, we look at technology and we can see all the benefits and assume there aren't any drawbacks. And Neil Postman is saying, no, with all technologies, surely there are great benefits, but there are great drawbacks as well, and we've got to learn how to weigh and navigate those parameters to make sure that we are able to be human in the best possible way. And so number 4 would be technology. And then the last one, sexuality. And by sexuality, we mean that our whole sense of identity and being is defined by how we express ourselves sexually. And we live in a day and culture of sexual exploration, where many feel that part of being human is trying to discover who they are. That this is not something that happens at birth. This is not something that is assigned to them or determined or predetermined. No, we have to figure that sexuality out. And I would argue that to simply reduce ourselves simply to sexual beings negates the sense of personhood and identity that's underneath the physical reality. Surely God created sex. Sex is beautiful. Sex is between a man and a woman. That's the way God created it. And it's a wonderful experience that God intended. That doesn't mean I'm throwing shade at any other expression. That is the biblical worldview. That is the Christian worldview. For whatever reason for the other expressions, I truly believe the gospel can minister to those different expressions. But what I am saying is that God created sex to be enjoyed and to be a beautifully shared experience between individuals. The problem is that in a society, and it's deeper than simply our morality, even though morality is important, when a society defines itself as purely physical beings, we negate the personhood. We negate the spiritual being, the soul of the person. We negate that, hey, underneath that physical being is a person to be respected, to be cherished, to be appreciated, to be valued. It's easy to reduce people simply to a sexual object. We truly understand that in the underworld and in criminalized spaces. If we're not careful, it can also reach into the innocent places where we're really trying to figure out who we are. And so here, we are sexual beings. To define ourselves solely as sexual beings may not be the best way to see ourselves clearly so that we can see others clearly. And so to wrap this up, let me give you the principle that I want us to get that I believe can help us see others clearly when we first see ourselves clearly. And here it is. Human dignity is a sacredly God-given gift that helps us see ourselves and others clearly. That is, we have to see that this human dignity, this human identity, this idea of being made in God's image is a gift from our Creator. And when we cherish that and see ourselves as valued by our Creator, we can turn around and see others clearly, regardless of where they land, regardless of what their challenges may be, regardless of even their differences of opinion and their practices of life. We understand at the end of the day, all of us at the core are made in the image of God, and that's the place that God starts out. And so I'll repeat that again. Human dignity is a sacredly God-given gift that helps us see ourselves and others clearly. And so this, of course, is the Imago Dei. It's something that is bestowed. I don't believe it's something that can be discovered. Some people think it's something that you can discover. I think you discover that you've been made by someone who is bigger than you. That's probably the best you can do in terms of discovery. But we discover, whether through our heritage, our lineage, our history, but more importantly, our theological roots in God, we discover that dignity is something that is bestowed. This is a word about freedom, that God made us to be free, choosing individuals. No one has the right to take away our freedoms and to handcuff us or oppress us. God created every single person to have dignity and freedom of choice to make those decisions. God does not want automatons. He wants people to make a free choice to choose Him and to love Him. That's exactly what Christ did on the cross. He created the freedom and the opportunity to love God freely as ourselves, without fear or without reservation. And then, of course, this is a word about dominion, where God one day will bring in His kingdom and Christians will rule the right way. That's really what we're to do in the interim. Until Jesus returns, our goal is to create a place that seeks the welfare of all people in a way that when Christians rule, we don't rule because of a particular party or a particular agenda or because we want to preserve a certain ethnic line. No, we rule in such a way that benefits all. We seek the welfare of the city, Jeremiah says in Jeremiah 29, in a way that benefits all people and not just ourselves. And so that's dominion. dominion. And then, of course, the second to the last one is morality. In other words, our convictions that we live out are actually for our flourishing and not for limiting us or hindering us in freedom, but they're the best way to express relationships, not only individually, but also how we relate to other people, so that it's a safe society for all people. And then lastly, our immortality. In other words, God created us not simply to end life at death, but we're to be with God eternally for all time, where we will enjoy his presence forever. And we as Christians have that responsibility to bring a sense of that future experience with God into the current reality as his people, to make a difference and make this a better place until he comes. So are we seeing others clearly? My word is, we've got to see ourselves clearly. We have to see that we are a sacred, God-giving gift that helps us see ourselves and others clearly. God bless you, and I'll be looking for you in the next video. Take care.